In today's lecture, we will be reviewing what anatomy and physiology mean and the levels of organization, as well as what homeostasis means and how it is maintained in the body. When we think about anatomy, we want to think about structure. Anatomy is what describes the structures of the body, what they are made of, where they are located, and the associated structures. Whereas physiology, we want to think of the study of function. If you think of the word and you sound it out, phonetically, you can hear physiology and function being very similar. So to memorize what anatomy is versus physiology, physiology is the study of function, anatomy is the study of structure. Physiology is going to look into the functions of anatomical structures and the individual and cooperative functions. So, what does this mean? If I have my cell phone, for example, my cell phone, the case, the screen protector, the actual phone itself, that would be the anatomy of the phone. But how the phone works, all the different apps in the phone, how it's going to charge the battery and interact with different platforms, that would be the physiology. When we're learning about anatomy, we're going to learn about the structure and then we're going to learn about the function. The structure is going to determine the function. We have a few different types of anatomy. We have gross anatomy, which means large. Macroscopic anatomy means large structures that we can see with our eyes. Microscopic is going to be with a microscope. It's going to be small anatomy. Gross anatomy or macroscopic anatomy, we want to think examines the large and visible structures. And there's a few different types. We have surface anatomy, things that we can palpate and touch. Those are your exterior features. Regional anatomy is going to be determined by body areas. So maybe the upper extremity, the lower extremity, the abdominal region. Sectional anatomy looks at cross sections. The sectional anatomy is something that you'll see in your different cross sections looking at the brain in neurology or different pathophysiology textbooks. Systemic anatomy are going to be organ systems, which we'll go over briefly and introduce in this lecture today. Those are going to include your respiratory system, your digestive system, your nervous system, your muscular system, your skeletal system. And then clinical anatomy is going to focus on medical specialties. You'll see pathological anatomy, radiographic anatomy would be like x-rays. Surgical anatomy, surgeons will focus on a specific area that they'll be treating. And developmental anatomy, which we don't really focus too much on in this class, that's going to be from conception to adulthood, including embryology. Microscopic anatomy, meaning that we need a microscope to actually visualize the cells, is going to examine cells and molecules. Two different types of terms that you want to memorize and vocabulary terms would be cytology. Cyto means cell. Ology means the study of. So cytology is the study of cells. Histology is the study of tissues. So histo means tissues. There's a few different types of physiologies as well. We just reviewed the different types of anatomy, which was the study of structure. Physiology, remember the study of function. These are different types of physiologies. Cell physiology is going to be the study of functioning of the cells, how the cells function. Organ physiology, how do those specific organs function? And then how are they going to function in a system? So that systemic physiology is how are those organs working together to form that entire system. Endocrinology is the study of hormones. You'll see this more in anatomy and physiology too. Cardiovascular physiology, neurophysiology, immunology, respiratory physiology. Renal means kidney. How are these organs working together to create this systemic physiology and working as a team? And then, of course, we have pathological physiology, which is going to be the study of diseases on these different organs or systems and the effects of the diseases on these organs or systems. Now, moving on to the levels of organization, we're always going to see that the levels of organization are going to be from smallest to largest. You want to memorize that chemicals are going to turn into cells, cells will turn into tissues, and tissues will turn into organs, organ systems, and then the organism. And I'll repeat that a few times within this lecture to help you memorize that. So, what does it mean at a chemical level? At a chemical level, it means that the atoms are the smallest stable units of matter, and these atoms, which we'll go deeper into in our next lecture, how these atoms interact to form these molecules. And these molecules are groups of atoms. The molecules then will come together to form the cellular level. These cells are going to be the smallest living units in the body. Looking at these terms, make sure that you can see the difference. Atoms are the smallest stable unit of matter, whereas cells are the smallest living unit in the body. Both terms have unit in it, but the smallest stable unit of matter would be the atom. The smallest living unit in the body would be the cell. Chemicals come together, which include the atoms, which turn into molecules, and then these molecules come together to eventually form these cells. The cells then work together to form tissues. At the tissue level, we'll see that these cells are working together as a group to form the tissue. And there's 4 different types of tissues. There's the epithelial tissue, the connective tissue, the muscle tissue, and the nervous tissue. I like to explain this in a way where if you think of each individual person in our class, if they were a cell, right? If they're a cell and they come together and they sit inside of a classroom, they become a class, right? They become a group now. Whereas if they're individual walking around the school, they are just cells interacting with other cells. But if they come into a classroom and they learn a subject, like right now we're learning anatomy and physiology, we've now become that tissue level. We're now a group of cells working together to learn the topic. So one more time, we have chemicals that turn into cells. Cells will come together to form different types of tissues. So different cells will form different tissues. A group of epithelial cells will form epithelial tissue. A group of connective cells will form connective tissue. A group of muscle cells will form muscle tissue, and nervous cells will turn into nervous tissue. We have these students going into each classroom and they form a different type of class. Right now we're in anatomy and physiology class. Then we have our organ levels. If we have 2 or more tissues, which we said there were 4 different types of tissues, we said there was epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. If there's 2 or more types of tissues working together, that now becomes an organ level. So if we think of 2 or more classes, if you apply to a program and now you're taking more than one class, now you're in a program. And then that program is within a school, which is within a larger administrative organization. Our organ level would be the tissues coming together, working together, and typically these organs are going to be made up of 2 or more tissues. And if you think about like your heart, for example, it needs muscle tissue, it needs nervous tissue for it to beat, it needs connective tissue to hold everything together, and it needs epithelial tissue. So most of these organs are going to have 2 or more types of tissues to make an organ. We have different organ systems working together to interact with other organs. In our digestive system, we not only have our stomach, we have our large intestine, small intestine, our pancreas playing a role in digestion, our liver, like all these organs are working together as a group and interacting with one another. And the humans have 11 organ systems. And then the organism level means that this has now brought together all of these different smaller levels of organization, and now they've created an organism. So one more time, we have the smallest is chemical. Chemicals turn into cells. Cells turn into tissues. Tissues turn into organs. Organs work together to create an organ system. And then we finally have our last level, which is us as a living life form, an organism. Looking here one more time, we have this is our chemical level, the atoms are coming together in combination to form a molecule, which we will discuss more in depth in our next lecture. This is a complex protein, a type of molecule. These proteins are going to interact to create protein filaments, and we'll look at this in our muscle sliding filament theory eventually when you learn about it in subsequent lectures. These proteins are going to interact with one another. This is actin and myosin. You don't need to know that just yet, but these proteins interact at a chemical level to form the cellular level, which in this case we have the heart muscle. Then the cellular level, multiple different heart muscle cells are going to form the tissue level, which is cardiac muscle tissue. This tissue is one type of tissue level that's going to be a part of an organ, which is the heart. The heart's also going to have nervous tissue, epithelial tissue, connective tissue. And this is going to then play a role in the cardiovascular system. So we could see the different types of blood vessels. We have arteries, veins. These are interacting within this cardiovascular system. After the organ system level, we have the organism, which is going to include the respiratory, lymphatic. You could see here the lymphatic system, the digestive system, the muscular system, the nervous system, the skeletal system. This is from another textbook. Here we could see these atoms, which we'll review in our next lecture: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus. These are going to play a role to form a molecule. This is going to be DNA. DNA is going to make up the cellular level, which is going to include our smooth muscle cell. In this case, we are building a specific type of tissue. This is smooth muscle tissue. You could see these are multiple smooth muscle cells that form an organ. In this case, we're forming the stomach. The stomach is going to also have epithelial, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Remember, organs are going to have two or more types of tissue. That's what qualifies them to be an organ. And the organ is going to be, in this case, the stomach. It resides and plays a role in the digestive system. And this is later our organism level. Our different types of organ systems include the integumentary system, skeletal system, muscular system, nervous system, endocrine system, and cardiovascular system. Our integumentary system, if we were in class, I would ask you, what do you think our integumentary system is? That's actually our skin. So if you ever hear hair, skin, and nails, that's your integumentary system, as well as sweat glands. Integumentary is one of our largest organ systems since it covers the entire body. It's going to be for protection. Think about what our skin does. It protects us against environmental hazards. It helps regulate body temperature. Thinking about sweating, when we get too hot, we begin to sweat, which cools down our body temperature. And it also provides sensory information. It allows us to touch and feel and respond to the external environment. Then we have our skeletal system. Our skeletal system is going to give us structure, right? It's going to help us hold ourselves up in place. It helps protect. If you think about your rib cage, it helps protect the internal structures like our lungs, our heart, our different organs. It provides support and protection. It's also, if you've ever heard of someone having osteoporosis, what does that mean? It means bone weakening. And you may have heard, if someone has osteoporosis, that they should take calcium. Our skeletal system actually is meant to store calcium and other minerals. And if it doesn't, if it's depleted, then we can see a weakening of our skeletal system. And it's also going to play a role in forming blood cells. We'll see later on how the bone marrow is going to create different types of red blood cells, white blood cells. It's going to include these different major organs, which you may not have thought about it, but our bones are considered an organ in the skeletal system. Cartilage associated ligaments and bone marrow, those are all going to be associated within this system. Usually what you'll hear later on in your studies is musculoskeletal. We usually put them together, but in this case we're looking at them structurally and functionally as separate. If we didn't have muscle, we wouldn't be able to have the structure of the bones. Our muscles are going to basically be holding and supporting the structure. It's going to help provide movement for the bones. Our muscular system is going to be our skeletal muscles and our associated tendons. Tendons connect muscle to bone. Ligaments, if you look here under skeletal system, ligaments are going to connect bone to bone. That's just something that you might want to jot down for future reference. Ligaments connect bone to bone, tendons connect muscle to bone. And muscles are going to provide us movement. We work out or we move around, we walk, we pick things up. It's also going to protect and support other tissues. So like in our abdominal region, we don't have bone there, but we have muscle there to protect our abdominal organs. It'll help generate heat. If we think about working out, if you go on a treadmill or if you walk fast or if you run, you start to produce heat. If you start to shiver, that's also muscle contraction. Our muscles generate heat to maintain that body temperature. Then we have our nervous system. That's going to include our brain, spinal cord, peripheral nerves, anything outside of the brain and spinal cord, and our sense organs. If you think about our nervous system, what does it do? It's going to help immediately respond to any type of stimulus. It's going to help coordinate activities with other organ systems. It's our communication amongst all the different organ systems. It helps interpret the sensory information. If we touch a hot plate, it sends that information to the brain, and our brain's going to interpret it and say, oh, we have to drop that hot plate. We shouldn't be holding on to that because we could burn ourselves. So it's constantly interpreting sensory information from the external conditions of our body, as well as interpreting the internal conditions. The endocrine system, when you think of endocrine, you want to think of hormones. It's going to be long term. Nervous system is a quick, fast response. That's a fast acting response. Endocrine is a long-term change in the activities of other organ systems. If we think about like puberty, the child getting older, going through adolescence, going through puberty, it takes a long period of time. This would include our endocrine system. It's adjusting metabolic activity, it's energy use of the body. It's also controlling many structural and functional changes during development. It's the organs that are associated with the endocrine system include the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, the pancreas, the adrenal glands, the gonads, which are reproductive organs, and endocrine tissues that are in other systems. Cardiovascular, cardiac means heart, vascular means vessel, right? Blood vessel. We have the major organs include the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood inside the blood vessels. That's also part of that cardiovascular system. What is it going to do? It's going to transport those nutrients, get rid of waste products, transport oxygen and carbon dioxide, distributes the blood cells and water and other dissolved materials throughout our body. It's going to distribute heat and assist in control of body temperature. If you think about in the wintertime, maybe your hands get cold, right? They might become a little bit pale because of the lack of blood supply that's going to that area. Lymphatic system, we want to think also as the immune system. It's going to defend against infection and disease, returns tissue fluids to the bloodstream. This is going to include our spleen, thymus, lymphatic vessels, lymph nodes, and tonsils. Our respiratory system is going to, as we breathe in air, right, through our nose, it's going to include our nasal cavities, our sinuses, our larynx, which is our voice box, trachea, which is the tube that's running from the larynx to the bronchi and to the lungs, as well as the alveoli where gas exchange actually occurs. This is to deliver air to the alveoli. It's also going to provide oxygen to the bloodstream, helps to remove carbon dioxide from the bloodstream, and produces sound for communication. Our digestive system, we're going to start with the food in our mouth. We chew the food. We have the teeth that are going to provide that chewing capability, the muscles of mastication. The tongue is going to help churn the food as well. The pharynx is our throat. Our pharynx is actually made up of three different sections: the nasopharynx, laryngopharynx, and oropharynx. And then we have the esophagus, which is going to be posterior to the trachea, and it's going to be a muscular tube that goes into the stomach. Then we have the small intestine, the large intestine, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. These are all playing a role in our digestive system. So what is the purpose of our digestive system? It helps to process and digest food, absorbs and conserves water, it helps absorb nutrients, and stores energy reserves. Urinary system, we want to think of the kidneys. The kidneys are going to connect to the urinary bladder through the ureters. It goes kidneys, ureters, urinary bladder, and then when we are excreting the urine, it's going to be through the urethra. It excretes waste products from the blood, controls water balance by regulating volume of urine produced, stores urine prior to voluntary elimination, and it helps to regulate the blood ion concentrations and pH. The last two that we have are the reproductive systems. This, again, you'll learn more in AMP2, and we're going to see that our major organs are going to include different types of sex cells, whether it's sperm or oocytes, seminal fluids, and different hormones. It helps to provide milk to nourish the newborn infant and helps in function with sexual intercourse as well. And these are just the follow-up slides of what we just mentioned previously. The integumentary system, hair, skin, nails, sweat glands, helps us protect and regulate body temperature, provide sensory information. Skeletal, our structure, think bones, cartilage, ligaments connecting bone to bone. The bone marrow, which is providing us the formation of blood cells, helps to store calcium and other minerals for that structural and protection. Muscular system, the skeletal muscles and the tendons. Remember, tendons connect muscle to bone, helps to function to provide movement, protects again and supports other tissues like in our abdominal cavity, our stomach area, generates heat that maintains body temperature. Nervous system, think brain, spinal cord. That's our central nervous system. Our peripheral nervous system is anything outside of that. Helps to respond to immediate stimuli, very fast, quick acting responses, coordinates and moderates other organ systems, and helps to interpret sensory information from our external environment as well as internal. Endocrine, think long-term changes. We think of pituitary, thyroid, adrenal glands, pancreas, gonads. The pancreas is actually both an endocrine organ and an exocrine organ. Helps to adjust metabolic activity and energy use. Think your thyroid. Some people have hypothyroidism. It's our thyroid gland isn't acting optimally. They might feel lethargic, tired, weak, gain weight. This endocrine system helps to adjust metabolic activity. Has to do with hormones. Endocrine system, think hormones. For the nervous system, we think neurotransmitters. Cardiovascular, think heart, cardiac. Vascular, the blood supply in the blood vessels, helps to distribute blood cells, water, nutrients, removing any types of waste products, bringing oxygen and nutrients to the tissues, and removing toxic waste products. And it's also going to help in control body temperature. Lymphatic, think immune system, defending against infection and disease, returns the tissue fluids to the bloodstream. It's going to almost filter the blood and return it back to the bloodstream in a clean fashion with removal of any types of pathogens. Our lymphatic vessels are part of the lymphatic system, lymph nodes, tonsils. If you think of someone who's had their tonsils removed or has chronic tonsillitis, inflammation of the tonsils, that's because they're constantly getting infected by a infection or a disease, and eventually they may have to remove it. Our spleen is a part of the lymphatic system. Our thymus, which actually gets smaller as we get older in age, which is why older people may be more susceptible to diseases because of the decrease in their immune system function. Lymphatic vessels, lymph nodes, and tonsils. Respiratory system, as we mentioned before, it's our nasal cavities, sinuses. If someone has a sinus infection in the springtime, that's part of our respiratory system. The larynx, trachea, bronchi, lungs, and alveoli. So again, providing oxygen to the bloodstream, removing carbon dioxide from the bloodstream, produces sounds for communication, and it helps to deliver air to the alveoli where the gas exchange, the oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange occurs. Digestive, teeth to chew, our tongue to churn the food prior to swallowing, which is our pharynx, esophagus, the muscular tube that goes down into the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, liver, gallbladder, pancreas. These are all helping to assist in processing and digesting the food, absorbing and conserving water, absorbing nutrients so that we're not deficient, stores energy reserves for future use. Urinary, we said kidneys, ureters, urinary bladder, and urethra. Controls water balance by regulating volume of urine produced, stores urine prior to voluntary elimination, regulates blood ion concentration and pH, more continuing. And then we had our reproductive systems. We have our testes, epididymis, ductus deferens, seminal vesicles, prostate gland, penis, and scrotum, and ovaries, uterine tubes, uterus, vagina, labia, clitoris, mammary glands. Both will have a specific type of sex cell and different hormones, which is going to help in supporting the reproductive system.